Breakfast, the most important meal of the day. For John List, this was also true. As he finished up his breakfast and folded his newspaper, he would wish his 3 kids well as they left for school, shouting their goodbyes as they were leaving. Their mother waved to them as they closed the door and headed out. As his wife Helen began clearing the breakfast plates, John walked into the garage and retrieved 2 old handguns. After taking a deep breath, he re-entered the massive kitchen. He swiftly walked up behind his wife of 20 years, pointed a 9mm handgun at the back of her head, and pulled the trigger. Hi folks, I'm Johnny, and welcome to The Oddest. On the 9th of November in 1971, John List killed his wife, his mother, and his 3 children. He then made a sandwich, drove to the bank, and vanished. Join me now as we delve into the List family murders. Sitting high on the hill in Westfield, New Jersey was the mansion house called Breeze Knoll. It housed 19 rooms in total. It even housed a ballroom, but besides all that, it housed a family. John List and his wife Helen lived there with their 3 kids. Patricia was 16 years old, Johnny was 15, and their little brother Freddie was 13. John's 84-year-old mother Alma lived in a converted apartment on the 3rd floor. John was the vice president at a bank in Jersey City. He was a devout Lutheran and Sunday school teacher, and John had a plan. As he stood and watched his wife's body slump to the floor, he calmly looked across the ceiling. His mind quickly skipped to the next task. He made his way to the stairs and climbed them to the 3rd floor. Alma was just preparing her own breakfast. She greeted her son by wishing him good morning and giving him a kiss. As she was putting a slice of bread into the toaster, she asked him about the loud noise that she just heard. He said, "Oh yeah, no, I'm not sure what that was." He raised a handgun to her head, but she turned round to face him. As she stared at the barrel of the gun, her final thoughts were that of confusion. Why? Why was her son pointing a gun at her? Alma's body proved too heavy to move, so List left her lying there in a pool of her own blood. He then went back down to the kitchen and dragged his wife's body into the ballroom. What a mess. There was blood everywhere. He went into the utility closet and retrieved a mop and bucket. It would take him several passes to eventually clean up his wife's blood. The fabric strands of the mop were so thickly laden with blood that he had to wring it by hand. It was tiring work for sure. It was time for a break, so he made himself a wee sandwich and sat down at the kitchen table to eat. John's mind was racing as he took the last bite of his sandwich. He had a busy day ahead of him. He still had to go to the bank, the post office, he had to write a few letters, make some phone calls, and he still had some killing to do. See, remember I said that John had a wee plan? Well, it turns out that he had long since lost his prestigious job as vice president at the bank. He was far too ashamed to tell his family, so instead he would get up each morning, get dressed as if going to work, kiss his wife goodbye and head to the train station, where he would spend the entire day reading newspapers and taking the occasional nap. Of course, this behaviour can only last so long. A big house like that doesn't come cheap, and with no income to pay for bills, there was only one option really. The family would have to claim welfare. No, hang on. John was far too proud for that and had to keep up appearances. I mean, what if the locals found out? Can't have that. No, instead he decided to steal money from his mother's bank account, which is a much better idea. Yet again, this plan can only go on for so long. He would either be found out pinching pennies from his mother's pension, or the funds would run out, bringing him back to square one. Pretty soon, the bank sent letters of foreclosure for the mansion house. It was then that John formulated another genius plan. He would disappear. Step 1. He went to the post office to put a stop on all mail coming to the house. Step 2. He stole and cashed in his mother's savings bonds. Step 3. He called everyone that he and his family knew to inform them that they were all moving to North Carolina. In fact, His family have already gone ahead and he would soon follow. Step 4. He went around the house and cut himself out of every photo. Step 5. He went to JFK International Airport in New York, but instead of catching a flight, he parked his car there and caught a bus back into the city. Step 6. Disappear forever. I feel like I'm missing something out here. Maybe I missed a step. Oh aye. Kill the entire family. First through the door was 16-year-old Patricia. Then, a few moments later, 13-year-old Frederick entered. After that, John got into his car and went to his remaining child's soccer game. You know, to show his support. He then drove young Johnny home, all the while telling him what a good game he had. Then, once they were back in the house, the young boy put up a fight, and after a short scuffle, List would shoot his son a further 10 times until the boy lay still. In this photo, you can see the sports bag belonging to Johnny. It's believed that he put that on the counter seconds before his father took his life. Chillingly, John slept in the house that night, whilst his family lay dead downstairs. In the morning, he left all the lights on, turned the radio up to maximum volume, and made his escape. He would later say that he killed his children to save their souls. John Emil List was born in Bay City, Michigan in 1925 to a 61-year-old father also called John and his 38-year-old mother, Alma. His parents were actually second cousins. I think that's all right. Right? It's not really incest, is it? Second cousins? They raised the younger John as a strict Lutheran in a largely German-speaking community. The year before his father's death, List graduated from Bay City Central High School. In 1943, he enlisted in the United States Army and served as a laboratory technician during World War II. After his discharge in 1946, List enrolled at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. According to psychiatrist Stephen Simring, who would interview him years later, List said that he generally played alone as a child and rarely interacted with anyone who wasn't a relative or a member of the family's church. When he got older, he told the psychiatrist, his mother and father continued to keep him rather isolated. His parents warned him again against certain social activities such as dancing, fearing that such activities would bring him into contact with the wrong people. Given all that, it's perhaps not surprising what happened one fall day in 1965 when young Dave Devlin, aged 9, and his father Harry, who was an artist, made the short trip from their home 2 doors down to Breeze Knoll, hiking up the steep driveway at 431 Hillside Avenue. Both were familiar with the sprawling property. Harry Devlin had painted a mural inside for the last owners, and Dave had played there with their kids. The younger Devlin especially was hopeful that the new neighbours' children might be suitable playmates for him and his 6 siblings. So, like proper Westfield suburbanites welcoming newcomers to the block, they arrived with an apple pie in hand from Geiger's cider mill. But when the door opened and Harry introduced himself, launching into the story of how he had painted the mural in the foyer, the new owner cut him off. List simply told the welcome party that he's not interested, and he warned them to leave them alone as they wanted to keep themselves to themselves. And they say it's nice to be nice. His neighbours even said that more often than not, List could be seen in the roasting hot summer days mowing his lawn wearing a suit and tie. Now, that's a bit weird, right? In 1950, John was stationed in Virginia. He was recalled to military service because the Korean War was escalating. His posting was at Fort Eustis, when he met a widow by the name of Helen Morris Taylor. Her first husband was killed in the Korean War, and she already had a daughter called Brenda. In December of 1951, John and Helen would get married. It's speculated that this was only because she claimed to be pregnant. Having a child out of wedlock would not sit right with the Lord. So they got married, and only after the wedding plans were in place and finalised was it revealed that she was in fact not pregnant. Helen's daughter Brenda would fall pregnant at the age of 16 and was sent away to a home for unwed mothers. List got a job at an accountancy firm in Detroit, and soon their first child, Patricia, was born in 1955. John had a deep resentment towards his own parents for being so strict when they were raising him. However, once he had a wee family of his own, it was clear that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. List demanded strict church attendance and insisted on running a good solid Christian household. On the few occasions when his wife would miss church service, or maybe had one too many drinks, this would make John very angry. Also the fact that Helen never kept her opinion to herself and would often speak her mind, especially about her failing marriage. These traits, of course, were not that of a good Christian woman. By the time 1971 rolled around, Patty was now 16 and was out hanging around with friends and even had a wee boyfriend. Whenever the boyfriend was at the house, List would make him wait in the parlour whilst the family sat and had lunch. The idea of Patty having a boyfriend drove List mad. The images of her hanging around Mindowaskin Park, kissing her boyfriend, swearing and maybe smoking cigarettes, it would keep him awake at night. Not because he was worried that she would be led astray or that she might fall into some kind of danger. He was simply worried that it was just not Christian.
Mr. List was a very polite, very well-mannered, very well-spoken. He appeared to enjoy talking to me. He knew perfectly well I was the expert hired by the bad guys, that is the prosecutor. Didn't make any difference to him. He rationalized, for example, that he shot his family because they were basically based on financial reasons. He couldn't hold a job. He was in a house that was too big for him. He couldn't afford the payments. He was a devout religious Lutheran. He figured that being poor, and essentially going to the poorhouse, was some kind of sin, that somehow he would shoot his family when they were, quote, in a state of grace. That's not a lie exactly, but somewhat, let's say, of a rationalization. But certainly he was not psychotic or out of touch with reality or hearing voices, nothing like this. He was rigid beyond rigid. So his choices of a universe of choices came down to three choices: run away, go bankrupt, kill his family. We have in medical and psychiatric diagnosis different classes of diagnoses. The big bad ones you think about are psychotic diagnoses like schizophrenia, where people believe they're God or they hear Jesus or they do things which make no sense. But there are other classes of mental disorder that one wouldn't even think of as illness, just peculiarities. And these are called personality disorders. There's some people who have personality, different types of personality. He meets clearly the criteria for obsessive compulsive personality. These are individuals who are emotionally isolated. They're not cruel, but they're emotionally isolated. They don't show feelings. They don't have very much in the way of feelings. They don't cry a whole lot. They're not emotional. They are very, very detail-oriented. They rationalize things that happen. They don't lie as an antisocial person would do, but they'll rationalize it. They'll give a seemingly logical explanation, as he did. He gave a seemingly logical explanation that he had three choices and he took the best one. I mean, looking at it at a distance, you say, oh my God.
Dr. Simring would later diagnose John with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. This is not to be confused with obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCPD is characterised by a strong need for order and strict adherence to how things should be. In List's case, that meant that everyone should behave the way that he was raised to be, reserved, proper, and pious. While the disorder is generally not associated with violence, it enabled List to rationalise his actions because he knew best for everyone around him. He certainly knew best for his daughter. Patty was convinced that her own father wanted her dead. Patty had confided in one of her school friends that she was terrified of her father, that she was totally convinced that he wanted her dead. Surely she was being a bit dramatic, right? Ed Iliano was the high school drama coach. He would later testify that in the weeks prior to the murders, Patty had sobbed to him that her father, John List, had actually told all three of his children that he was in fact going to kill them. Oh, I'm going to kill you. Seriously, I'm going to kill you. He even asked them if they would prefer burial or cremation. Let's step back a wee bit to 1961. The family would move to Rochester, New York, as John got a managerial position there with Xerox. This is where the family first got a taste of the good life. He had a handsome salary and a large expense account. In later years, John would write his memoirs. When recalling this particular period of his life, he wrote, "On the sunny side of 40, I was clearly a success. I was totally unaware of the storm clouds building on my professional horizon." This was to be short-lived, however, as only 4 years later in 1965, Xerox fired him. He took it on the chin, but like I said, they had a wee taste of the good life, so his ambitions were high. List landed a job as Vice President and Comptroller at the First National Bank of Jersey City, and the family set its sights on Breeze Knoll. Even if he couldn't afford it, they paid 50 grand for the home, borrowing another $10,000 from Alma for the down payment. List remodelled the third floor so that Alma could have a proper apartment. And that pretty much brings us full circle. So, a man walks into the Social Security Administration office in New Jersey. He's fairly unassuming looking. Normal, some folk might say. The bespectacled gentleman is extremely polite to everyone he encounters whilst he's there. The reason for the visit is simple. The poor chap has lost his social security card and he needs a new one. Bear in mind, this is late 1971. Identity theft wasn't really a big thing back in those days, and there certainly weren't the preventative measures in place that there are now. After the mild-mannered man fills out a wee form, he hands it back to the clerk with a smile. She smiles back, accepting the form, and a few moments later she hands him a small card with a blue border. Printed neatly in the middle is an entirely new fake name. John List has just become Robert P. Clark. For weeks, the List's next-door neighbour, Dr. Bill Cunnick, had not seen anyone coming or going from Breeze Knoll, but the lights glowed from within the mansion day and night. Presumably someone, perhaps Alma, was home. A short time later, he noticed that the lights would go out altogether, one by one. It was then that Bill Cunnick and his wife became aware of a strange car that would drive past and often stop outside of the List house night after night. Patty's drama coach, Ed Iliano, was bothered by the lights too. He was the one that kept driving by, thinking it was strange that his student, who had given no advanced warning of a possible departure, had vanished, supposedly to visit a sick family member in North Carolina, according to the story that her father told Iliano's fellow drama coach, Barbara Sheridan. Iliano convinced Sheridan to accompany him to Breeze Knoll after relaying his fears and highlighting the strange lights at the house. The arrival of Iliano's car, yet again outside the property, prompted Bill Cunnick to call the cops. 2 officers from the Westfield Police Department entered the house alongside Iliano and Sheridan a little after 10 p.m. What unnerved them wasn't necessarily the smell. It was the organ music piping through the sound system, low but insistent, as if they had stepped into a church service. The musical accompaniment to John List's slaughter was still playing 28 days after he had disappeared without a trace. The sprawling mansion suggested grandeur, luxury, and a life of plenty. But, as neighbours would later learn, appearances can be deceiving. The interior of the house was sparsely furnished and increasingly shabby. Only a curtain separated the living room from the ballroom. Ed Iliano pulled it aside on the night of December 7th, 1971, and the police officer's flashlight illuminated the nightmare before them. 4 bodies, arranged neatly on the oak floor. They were placed on red and blue sleeping bags darkened and stiffened with dried blood. The children were side by side, still dressed in their jackets from the cold fall day 4 weeks earlier. Patty and Fred were on their sides facing each other. Johnny was on his back, his face covered with a white towel and his hands still in gloves resting on his stomach. The sides of the sleeping bag were wrapped around him as if to keep him warm. Helen's body was perpendicular, about a foot from her children's heads and closest to the door. Her nightgown had gathered up around her hips and her arms were stretched out over her head, which was also covered by a towel. The police wondered what other horrors lay within this mansion house. After all, there were 6 family members, and 2 were still unaccounted for. As they made their way from room to room, then eventually floor to floor, they discovered List's mother, Alma, in her wee apartment upstairs. In List's study, officers discovered a kind of treasure map, notes taped to his desk and filing cabinet, labelling what was inside and how to access it. One of these notes directed authorities to a locked filing cabinet drawer. Inside was a manila folder holding the letters that John List composed in preparation for his departure. One was a note about repaying a $500 loan from his boss. Others were brief apologies to relatives, and one was a startling confession written to his pastor. In 5 pages of handwritten scrawl, John List would explain everything. Dear Pastor Raywinkle, I'm sorry to add this additional burden to your work. I know that what has been done is wrong from all that I have been taught, and that any reasons that I might give will not make it right. But you are the one person that I know that, while not condoning this, will at least possibly understand why I felt that I had to do this. Knowing the type of location that one would have to live in, plus the environment for the children, plus the effect on them, knowing they were on welfare, was just more than I thought they could and should endure. With Pat being so determined to get into acting, I was also fearful as to what this might do to her continuing to be a Christian. I'm sure it wouldn't have helped. At least I'm certain that all have gone to heaven now. If things had gone on, who knows if that would be the case. P.S. Mother's in the hallway in the attic, 3rd floor. She was too heavy to move. Although the investigators found the contents of the letter chilling, there was one piece of information that concerned them even more. It was dated November 9th. Their fugitive, John List, had a month's head start. Westfield detective Lieutenant Robert Bell received a call from the Port Authority Police on the afternoon of December 9th, 1971. Less than 2 days after the bodies of the List family were discovered. List's 1963 Chevy Impala was found in Lot 8 at John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens. The parking voucher still on the vehicle was dated November 10th, the day after the murders. It was the first of many clues that would lead authorities absolutely nowhere. The initial search for List was exhaustive, according to law enforcement sources and police and FBI documents. Throughout late 1971 and early 1972, agents pored over flight manifests and ran down suspected sightings. The FBI even pursued the possibility that John List was D.B. Cooper, the fake name used by a man who hijacked a flight in the Northwest a few weeks after the List killings. This proved to be a dead end, although yours truly here has already done an extensive video on the D.B. Cooper case. I shall leave a wee link to that down in the description. Maybe the reason the feds never caught D.B. Cooper was because they never subscribed to my channel. So maybe you should. So what do we know so far? We already know that List had planned this long before it took place. In fact, back in October, he had applied for a handgun licence, but ultimately didn't need this, as he just used his father's old guns that he found in the garage. We know that he dumped his car at JFK. We also know that he took a series of random trains and buses leading him to Denver, which he would later say that he chose because he wanted to see the mountains. List took no chances, at least at first. He grew a moustache and switched up his wardrobe, trading in suits for more casual wear and a cap pulled down low over his face. The disguise didn't matter much. There was no 24-hour cable news, and List saw only one newspaper article that included a photo. He avoided anything that he thought could get him caught. He never got so much as a parking ticket, and for the first time in his life he stopped going to church. But eventually, that caution subsided as he relaxed into his new identity and a life free from the burdens of a family and other expectations. In 1977, during a church event, he met another woman called Dolores Miller. 51-year-old John List was now 46-year-old Bob Clark. He told Dolores that his ex-wife sadly passed away due to lung cancer and that he had no children. In 1985, 14 years after List killed his first family, Robert P. Clark and Dolores Miller tied the knot. The funeral took place on December 11th, 1971, at the same church where the List family worshipped every Sunday. Police and FBI agents flanked the doors as nearly 300 mourners poured in and another 100 onlookers watched from across the street. 5 caskets were lined up in the front of the church, requiring dozens of pallbearers. Some were kids who had never been to a funeral. A few months later, Breeze Knoll would meet its own end, when a suspicious fire would burn it down. It was believed it could have been local kids, but this was never proved. The locals certainly weren't sorry to see it gone. Meanwhile, the manhunt for List was still going strong, with the FBI releasing images and mugshots in newspapers, national and international. There were appeals on radio stations and on TV. There were a few close calls, suspects investigated and leads followed up, but nothing led them to John List. He had achieved his goal and vanished forever. Bob Clark and his new wife Dolores were having a normal life. Well, seemingly normal, although Bob kept getting fired and the couple would struggle financially. One of Dolores' friends and neighbours started getting a wee bit suspicious when she picked up a copy of the Weekly World News, a tabloid of far-fetched stories and true crime. It included a story about a family killer named John List. Flannery immediately saw the resemblance to her neighbour Bob. After she read that List was also a church-going accountant, she rushed next door with the magazine. She would show the article to Dolores and plead her case that this, in fact, could be Bob. Of course, Dolores told her pal to get out with her crazy theories and take her rubbish newspaper with her. Through it all, List carried on. In 1988, he did manage to find a new job, albeit thousands of miles away in Richmond, Virginia, and only as a junior accountant. His former co-worker, Les Wingfield, said that the man he knew as Robert Clark would get huffy if things weren't just so, even loudly announcing when the paper towels ran out in the bathroom. Bob and Dolores would buy a new home in Brander Mill, just southwest of Richmond. Of course, it was in Dolores' name, and mostly with her money. They started attending services at the nearby Lutheran church, where another parishioner, Jerome Kendall, described Bob Clark as so bland that if he was wearing a brown suit and it was a panelled room, he might have faded into the background. In a living room in Aurora, Colorado, a 57-year-old Wanda Flannery was sitting with her daughter and son-in-law. Her favourite TV show was about to air, and the three sat with bated breath as the host would outline the schedule for tonight's programme.
This is America's Most Wanted, and I'm John Walsh.
Wanda Flannery was the neighbour that discovered the article in the Weekly World News and took it to her neighbour Dolores, as she thought that this John List killer guy looked a bit like her new husband Bob. On the show, the presenter talked about the gruesome murder back in 1971 in Westfield. As part of the investigation, they had an artist make a sculpted bust of what they believe the murderer would look like today in 1989. It was him! It was Bob, without a doubt. Even Flannery's son-in-law agreed, as he too knew Bob Clark. That's when they decided to call the tip line number that flashed across the bottom of the screen. The men who rang the doorbell expected another dead end. FBI agents August and Nidecker were often tasked with following up on leads that were occasionally decent, but more often worthless. On the morning of June 1st, 1989, the Fugitive Task Force members working out of the Richmond, Virginia field office started at a house in Midlothian, not because the tip seemed especially promising, but because it was the furthest away from the office. It was just one of many leads relating to any number of different fugitives that the agents planned to check off their list that Thursday. The woman who answered the door seemed perplexed and understandably concerned. She confirmed the agents were indeed at the home of Robert and Dolores Clark, though Robert was presently at work. Might she show them a photo of her husband, they asked, just to confirm that he was not the man they were looking for. 11 days had passed since the airing of the America's Most Wanted episode featuring the List murders. The hundreds of leads that had poured in that night had turned up nothing. Authorities had taken their last best shot, but John List was still on the loose. But then Dolores handed August and Niedecker a pair of photos, including her and Robert's wedding picture. Agent August stared at the photo, and after giving his partner a subtle side glance, he thought to himself, my God, I think this is John List. August didn't want to let Dolores in on his suspicions. He told her that he didn't think the person in the photo was the guy they were looking for, but he wanted to check with Robert just to be certain. Might she be able to share her husband's office address? August set off, leaving Niedecker behind. They wanted to make sure that Dolores didn't call her husband and warn him that the authorities were on their way. Agent August raced to the nearest payphone to call for backup. The agents headed up to a nondescript office building in Richmond, 25 minutes away. Inside the accounting offices in Suite 207, they barely started to ask the receptionist where they could find Robert Clark when they saw the face from the wanted poster, strolling down the hall, a sheet of paper in his hands. In the office, the agents demanded the accountant put his hands on the wall, and August asked if he was John List. The man insisted that he was Robert Clark, but the agents could see the mastoidectomy scar by his ear, and later, after they cuffed him, the hernia scars on his abdomen. They had their guy. It took the jurors, 9 men and 3 women, one of whom was only 14 when the List murders happened, about 9 hours to return their verdict. John Emil List was guilty of murder on all 5 counts. On the 1st of May 1990, John List was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. While standing there in court showing no emotion whatsoever, he read out the following statement.
Remain truly sorry for the tragedy that happened in 1971. I feel that due to my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened.
Death finally came for John List in 2008. The prisoner was transferred from New Jersey State Prison in Trenton to nearby St. Francis Medical Center with pneumonia on March 18th. He died 4 days later. A half-century has passed since the discovery of the strange and profoundly disturbing crime that rocked Westfield and became the obsession of people not just in New Jersey but across the nation. A real-life villain so unfeeling that on the night of the killings he slept comfortably in the same mansion as his victims. If you're still here with me, I want to thank you all sincerely for your time, and I do hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave me a message and say hello. I think it's time for a wee cup of tea. We all deserve it. Stay safe out there, folks. Remember to tell someone that you love them, and above all else, keep smiling.